Give yourself total power over something another person needs, with zero chance of getting caught, and zero social cost either way. No laws. No judgment. No consequences. Now ask yourself honestly what you'd actually do. Economists stopped asking people to imagine it. They just built the room and watched. They called it the Dictator Game. And the name isn't an exaggeration. In the early 1990s, a team of economists led by Daniel Kahneman, Jack Netsch, and Richard Thaler sat down to test something that sounds almost too simple to matter. Take two strangers. Give one of them a sum of money, say $20. Tell that person they can split it with the other stranger however they want. Any amount. Even zero. The second person has no say, no vote, no leverage. They can't negotiate, reject the offer, or punish the first person in any way. Whatever they're given, they keep. Whatever they're not given, they never see. This wasn't a trick question. It was a stripped-down model of pure, unaccountable power. Economists at the time had a working assumption about human behavior. It came from a theory called Homo economicus, the idea that people, left to their own devices, act in pure rational self-interest. If that theory was correct, the prediction was obvious. The person in control keeps everything. Why would they give away money to a stranger they'll never see again, who has no way to punish them for keeping it all? The results came back, and they broke the model immediately. Some people did keep everything, but most didn't. Across dozens of replications over the following decades, the average amount given away hovered between 20 and 30% of the total. Not zero, not half, somewhere in between, like something in these people was negotiating with itself. Researchers ran the experiment again and again, changing the variables each time to isolate exactly what was happening. They tried it with real strangers instead of lab volunteers who might expect to meet again. Giving stayed roughly the same. They ran it anonymously, with no possible way to trace who gave what. Giving barely dropped. They ran it with larger sums of real money instead of hypothetical amounts. The percentages held. Whatever was making people share, it wasn't fear of getting caught, and it wasn't the size of the stakes. Then economists wanted to know something else. Was this a quirk of Western university students, the population most of these early studies had used? In 2004, anthropologist Joseph Henrich led a team that ran the same game across 15 small-scale societies on 4 continents. Amazonian farmers, East African herders, Pacific Island whale hunters. Groups with no exposure to modern economic theory, no history of playing games like this at all. The specific percentages shifted from culture to culture. Some societies gave more, some gave less. But in every single one of the 15 groups, without exception, people gave away something. 0 societies produced a population of pure takers. Whatever this instinct was, it wasn't a Western invention, and it wasn't a product of modern economics classes teaching people how they're supposed to behave. It showed up everywhere anthropologists looked, in forms shaped by local culture, but never absent. This is where it gets stranger. Neuroscientists eventually got involved, and they wanted to know what was actually happening inside the brain during that decision. In a 2006 study, researchers used fMRI scanners to watch participants' brains while they played variations of these fairness games. When people considered keeping an unfair amount for themselves, the brain's reward centers lit up exactly as expected. Money is money. But researchers also found activity in the anterior insula, a region associated with disgust and discomfort, activating specifically when people considered treating someone unfairly. The brain wasn't just calculating a payout, it was registering something closer to a mild alarm. Selfishness didn't just compete with fairness in these people's minds. It felt, physically, slightly wrong. Now compare this to a related experiment called the Ultimatum game, and the difference tells you something important. In the Ultimatum game, the second person isn't powerless. They can reject the offer entirely, and if they do, both people get nothing. Under this version, offers jump dramatically. People start offering closer to 40 or 50%, not 20 or 30. The moment the other person has a way to fight back, generosity increases. Which means the giving in the Dictator game wasn't about fear of retaliation. There was no retaliation possible. It was something that existed even when the other person was completely defenseless. The Ultimatum game shows what people do when they might get punished. The Dictator game shows what they do when they absolutely cannot be. And the gap between those two numbers is smaller than you'd expect, which is either deeply reassuring or deeply strange, depending on how you look at it. But not for everyone. And this is the part almost nobody talks about. Across every version of this experiment, roughly a quarter to a third of participants gave away nothing, or next to nothing, every single time, under every condition. No anonymity effect changed it. No framing changed it. No amount of money changed it. Researchers began looking closer at this subgroup, and what they found lines up with something separate researchers had already been studying for decades. Personality psychologists call it the Dark Triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Not clinical diagnoses in most cases, just personality traits that exist on a spectrum in the general population. People who score high on these traits show up disproportionately among the group that keeps everything in the dictator game. For them, the discomfort other people feel at an unfair split simply doesn't register the same way. The anterior insula doesn't light up. The alarm doesn't go off. So the game wasn't measuring greed. It was measuring something closer to a hidden dial, and most people's dial was set to fairness by default, whether or not anyone was watching. Here's the part that should unsettle you more than the greedy minority. The game strips away every single external reason to be fair. No punishment. No reputation. No relationship. No God. No law. No witness. And still, most human beings, given true and total unaccountable power, chose to give something away anyway. That single fact quietly demolished a few centuries of economic theory. It suggested that fairness isn't a rule imposed on us from outside, something we only follow because we're afraid of getting caught. For most people, it looks like it's wired in, built into the architecture of the brain itself, the same way pain is built in, or hunger. Something in you objects to unfairness on a level below conscious strategy, and the discomfort shows up whether or not anyone is around to see the outcome. Evolutionary psychologists have a theory for why this might exist. For most of human history, we didn't survive as isolated individuals competing for resources. We survived in small groups, dependent on each other for food, protection, and information. A person who consistently took everything and gave nothing back would eventually be noticed, even without formal rules. They'd be excluded, avoided, cut off from the group's resources when they needed them most. Fairness, in that world, wasn't a moral abstraction. It was a survival strategy so consistently useful that natural selection may have built the discomfort directly into the brain, so you wouldn't have to consciously calculate it every single time. You just feel it, instantly, before you had time to reason your way around it. We don't run this experiment in a lab very often anymore. We run it constantly, in real life, without realizing it. Every anonymous online account is a small dictator game. Every position with unchecked authority, a manager nobody audits, a moderator with no oversight, a landlord in a market with no regulation, is the same room with different furniture. No laws, no judgment, no consequences, or close enough to it, and the same split shows up. Most people, even with total leverage and zero accountability, don't take everything. A minority reliably does, and they tend to keep doing it in every context you hand them power in, because the alarm that stops everyone else was never installed in them to begin with. Which brings us back to the room. No laws, no judgment, no consequences. Most people who actually sat down in that chair, holding real power over another real person's outcome, didn't take everything. They didn't need a rule to stop them. Something in their own head did the job the law was supposed to do. But a minority didn't feel that alarm at all. And the unsettling part isn't that they exist. It's that from the outside, in everyday life, you can't tell which kind of person you're dealing with until the room has no walls left. The economists thought they were testing a theory about money. What they actually built was a mirror. And most people, when they finally looked into it, found something in themselves they didn't know was watching.